Welcome to Breaking Down Bergman. I'm David Friend.
I'm Sonia Strimban.
And we're looking at The Virgin Spring. The Virgin Spring is certainly a notable film in Bergman's career. It was one of the first ones to win recognition by the Academy Awards. It won the Foreign Film Oscar. It also scored a whole bunch of controversy, but obviously this film has a lot more going for it than that sort of cheap promotional edge. This is actually a really solid Bergman film, and there is a lot here that I think bothers people.
Yes, it bothered me quite a bit. I didn't dislike the film. I thought it was a very effective movie, and a lot of the themes that he tried to convey were very masterfully done. But that being said, I thought it was very disturbing, and Bergman is no stranger to controversy. We've seen him challenge us before with different types of subject matter. But the violence that happens in this movie, in particular the pivotal scene where the young character of Karen gets raped in the middle of the film, is really difficult to watch, and it's really disturbing. And yes, it is kind of the catalyst for a lot of the later action, and really is a tipping point in the movie for many of the themes that Bergman weaves in. But it's just such a, I don't even know, like it smacked
really
me in the face.
It shocks you to your core, I think.
Yeah.
And it's something you don't really want to downplay. A lot of movies over time lose their power because of what happens in society and just values and such. I don't think The Virgin Spring has. Not like you would expect, at least. The rape scene in it is very powerful, and it's because of the skill that Bergman uses to translate this tragic event to the audience. It's not just something you're watching. It's something that you're involved in.
If you compare it to similar scenes in other film, it's not that it's more graphic. Like, there's no nudity, for example. No. There's no weapons, there's no slashing, and yet it's absolutely vile and disturbing. And I think the reason is because it's not that you don't foresee it coming, right? You foresee it coming. There's lots of elements that lead up to it. The whole thing on Karen's part is a terrible idea.
I was going into the forest alone.
Yes, let's go into the forest and have a picnic with these suspicious-looking homeless herdsmen.
Yeah, exactly.
And then try to flirt with them too on top of it. But I think what really happens here is that the way that the movie starts out, it's, I don't want to say typical Bergman, but it's certainly very familiar. We get the medieval setting, we have the costumes, and then all of that is so rapidly vanished, and you're absolutely sucked into the film during the scene that you feel ultimately complicit in what's happening in the movie. And from that moment forward, I feel like the film doesn't really let you go.
What Bergman really does in this scene, for one, is he takes his trademark sound that we sort of talked about. In some moments you hear things like the birds, and you're just watching this act take place, and you're just forced to witness this terrible event, and he takes everything else out of it. No music, no other sort of manipulative theatrics. It just takes you into the moment, and I think it really changes your opinion of the character, because at the beginning of the movie, our main character Karen, she's kind of obnoxious. She's a spoiled brat, and I don't think you sympathize with her. Very much, at least, because you see her representing a lot of things, and then in this one scene, this one moment, all of that goes away. Bergman sort of casts it aside, and you see a young, innocent girl who, was probably a little bit stupid and naive going out into the forest, but...
I mean, yeah, she's not, at the beginning of the film, she's a little bit of... She's childish. She's very childish.
Yeah, okay.
But you certainly don't have this feeling of, oh, God, like, get her out of here, or you wish that something bad would happen to her. Not at all. And I think for me, like you mentioned the sound in the film, for me, it's the visual. Okay. It's really it's the juxtaposition that happens between, the innocence and the corruption of the innocence, the violation. And, Karen getting ready in the morning, her mother dressing her up in this elaborate outfit, and her excitement at the beautiful day, at her own youth, her own beauty. She's getting dressed, like piece by piece, her mother is layering her clothing. And then, fast forward to her in the middle of the forest being attacked, and that clothing is being ripped to shreds. And it's literally like the pieces of her happiness, her youth, her life, her innocence that are being completely stripped off of her.
Destroyed, literally.
Yeah, and Bergman is such a master of the subtle touch. So, for example, when she's getting dressed, her mother brings her these white stockings, and there's like a reference in the movie about the white stockings. And then, during the scene, you see this one stocking like sliding off her knee and being stained by mud. And it's just like that one zoom in on that poor little knee and that poor little stocking. It just, it's so gripping. And you can't move away from it. And that becomes symbolic because those clothes reappear again and again. When those herdsmen kind of leave her body there, they literally strip her of the clothing because they feel they can resell it. And when they go to resell it, in this horrific, gruesome twist, they're trying to resell it to her very parents. And that's how her parents know that she's gone. I don't know, those little twists in this film were so subtle and so effective on Bergman's part. Like, he just did such a great job of making this whole movie so painful.
Well, it's not difficult to get sidetracked by the early sequence in the film because the rape scene does frame the rest of this film, but this is really a tale of revenge.
It is, and like not in a hugely innovative way either. Like, it's very classical in the structure of the film. I mean, you can see something like this dating back to Greek tragedies, let's say the tale of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra, or something like Shakespeare with Titus Andronicus, where he exacts really gruesome revenge over the rape and mutilation of his daughter, and right into more modern films.
Perhaps one of the most notable ones being Last House on the Left, which was done by Wes Craven, is actually a remake in many ways. I think one of the most impressive aspects of The Virgin Spring is the real complexity of the characters. And we sort of talked about this when we addressed Karen a moment ago. But it really stretches across the whole spectrum of people in the movie. And it's that Bergman presents the audience with characters that aren't two-dimensional, they're not linear, they are human beings. In particular, I'm thinking of Karen's father, Torre, who is really the moral center of this film, because once he finds out that his daughter has been raped and murdered, he begins this act of vengeance that, as an audience member, I think that you're pretty much along for the ride and agree with him, until he reaches a certain point. And that is when he kills the little boy of the three men who were involved in the rape. Now, the boy was guilty in the sense that he was present, but he wasn't involved in the rape, and he felt remorse. I mean, we saw it. He tried to bury the girl. He became ill. And as an audience member, all of a sudden, everything that you have been believing in until this moment doesn't exist as you thought it had. And you begin to question everything that has happened before, and what is too far? What is reasonable?
Torre's reversal is definitely a turning point in the film. And I think it really, his struggle with what he's dealing with really encapsulates what the thrust of this movie is about, which is about human nature, and both the strong points of it, how noble we can be, and the most savage elements of human nature, because you see the entire spectrum in this one film. With Tori in particular, what's interesting is that I think he really embodies that struggle of his kind of more enlightened self and then his basest self, and the triggers behind it. So for example, like you said at the beginning of the film, he's a good man, he's the father of the household, he's enlightened in the sense that he's adopted this new faith that is coming to Europe at the time, which is Christianity, and it's seen as a sign of civilization over paganism. So his household follows those rules. But then what we have here is a little bit kind of like a Job tale, where you have this nobleman who is righteous, and therefore everything in his life should be good. He should be protected, right? But then when tragedy befalls him, what is he left to do? If he's truly enlightened and a man of God, then he's just supposed to accept God's will and submit to it and turn the other cheek and all those good Christian things. But we don't see that here. And we see him really struggling with the ability to do that. And I think it's really epitomized in the scene where he struggles with the sapling tree. And it's such a symbolic and powerful scene for me, with him wrestling this young tree from the ground, which I think is symbolic of his new kind of fledgling faith. And he's literally fighting against it and trying to resist his more human response, which is to savagely kill these men that are now in his household.
I found that moment a little over the top, and I
Really?
know I just find that visually Bergman knew what he was doing, and on paper it makes sense. Even visually it kind of makes sense. But in this film,
It's beautiful.
I don't think it needed that moment.
Well, at least it's not another mirror.
That's true. That's true. But I just didn't. I think that the film, with that moment taken out of it, is just as powerful, if not more so, because I found it distracting. But aside from that, I think that Bergman was distracted in other ways. He kind of got on a tangent about religion, and I don't think The Virgin Spring is really a film about religion like we've seen.
No, I agree with you. I think the problem was that scene, it was kind of a turning point for a lot of things, and then he went and committed his revenge. But Bergman didn't know how to wrap it up with that same raw human element, and he slid back into something that he's, a territory that he's more comfortable with, which is introducing these kind of religious themes.
Yeah.
So if we look towards the end of the film, where we have another moment of Torre struggling with his faith, it takes on a completely different connotation. So it's no longer about him fighting with his human urges and kind of his psychology. It's about, oh, I feel guilty, therefore I have to erect a temple to God, and this will become a religious site. But I feel there's so much less truth in that scene, because even when he's having that breakdown and he's on his knees and his arms are reaching up to God, we don't see him. His back is turned towards us. So it really takes a lot of that real emotion and the authenticity out of the experience that he's having. Whereas with the sapling, we see him straining and facing us the whole time and grimacing, and it's just a lot more real and honest to me.
I think that The Virgin Spring excels in its raw simplicity, and when it becomes that overly complicated film in ways with religion, I think it loses its momentum. Mm-hmm. The complexity of the human being is enough in itself. Bergman didn't need to, make it the Bergman film that we might have expected. It was a great film before then. Mm-hmm. I think the question being, is it essential Bergman?
Yes.
I think this is very much essential Bergman.
Despite being so disturbing, I think it's definitely a must-see. I think he's doing a lot of very unique things in this movie, and it's not one that you walk away from unaffected, for sure.
And that brings us to the end of this discussion. We made it. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and follow us along as we continue to watch all Ingmar Bergman's films.
And give us your feedback. We are always eager to hear what you have to say.
And we will see you next time on Breaking Down Bergman.